okay, yeah, poor Cassie and her family, and really sucks for her. But what about us and our son? He's the real victim here.
So are they saying that Brian was the mastermind and Tori was just along for the ride?
Correct.
What's the story they're giving?
That's exactly it. They believe that Tori believed that he was just acting, that it was just a movie, that it was just, all kind of plotted and manipulated out by Brian. And I believe Lost for Life premiered in 2013, and our show aired for the first time in 2014. And the response we got from our audienceship was almost the same as how people responded to Tori on Lost for Life, in that people were like, okay, maybe life without parole is not the right thing for juveniles, but I don't want that kid out because he's so insightless.
So in the documentary Lost for Life, when they do speak to Tori's parents, did you notice? So his parents are speaking, and Tori doesn't even appear to even try to act like he's looking like he's agreeing with them. Mm-hmm. He doesn't even really believe what they're saying, but he doesn't have the heart to really say anything to his parents, I don't feel like, because his dad is specifically saying that, Tori said that he takes responsibility for his actions, and the person that he was then is not the person he is now. So this was about 5 years after the crime. So I think he was 21 at this time. Mm-hmm. And his dad said, well, the worst part is that the things that you're in prison for, the things you were charged for, have nothing to even do with what you actually did.
Right.
Which means they're just completely in the dark, regardless of these journals, of these. Not only does he give a confession to the police, but they talk about it so much beforehand. And right afterward, they have his own voice on tape admitting to what he's done and admitting to being there. But I can guarantee you the contents of some of these journals took place before he was friends with Brian.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's just their parental
and also there
denial.
Comes with, if he has a history of hurting animals, if he has a knife collection, I mean, if the weapon that was used to kill Cassie
is your personal
from
weapon.
His personal knife collection, and questionable letting a child have a knife collection.
Right. So they have to look at it this way, or it's going to come off as their fault, in some way.
Absolutely.
That they contributed at least to his delinquency.
I have a question before we continue. Why Cassie? What was her connection because it seems like it doesn't seem like they had a very close connection. Why her? Of all the people, why was she their victim?
It's because Brian specifically just became fixated on her. She was beautiful and he had an obsessive crush on her. Once she and Matt started dating, I think that's kind of what threw him over the edge. And he actually specifically says that in his mind, when he thinks of her, there's one time where she turned around in class and she was giving him they were giving each other a hard time, but she turned and smiled at him, and it has always stuck in his mind. It had always stuck in his mind from that point on. So he just got obsessed with her. I really think that's what it is.
Yeah. But, Brian just seemed to get fixated on her. I'm not sure what Tori's connection is, because obviously Tori will have known her longer, having been a native of Pocatello. So I don't know what the history was there, but I mean, it was an unusual choice. She didn't seem to have ever bullied them or alienated them or ostracized them in any way. I
think he wanted to date her too, and that her dating Matt was like her snubbing him, even though I'm sure he never tried to date her.
I just feel like, oh God, that's because
one of the one of the terrible parts of this story is that it was her, and it could have been anyone, but it just was her.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, again, it's this toxic masculinity where men feel like they deserve a beautiful woman, or they deserve the attention of a beautiful woman. And so many cases I've seen where just because someone they like is dating someone else that they choose to hurt this person.
Just because they smile. Yeah.
Definitely one of the earlier cases, I would say, of a crime like that for sure, you know.
And it's like, just be a decent human being.
Well, and also I think that there were many opportunities and times that parents, families, school counselors, people in the community could have stepped in for either one of the boys. And, you know, I think that if you see someone in your life with these dark, obsessive, compulsions, please step in and say something. There are resources available. It's difficult and challenging, but going through a murder trial is going to be infinitely more difficult. So,
yeah, I do feel like since 2006, I mean, it's been more than a decade. I do feel like mental health issues and, as far as the bullying campaigns, I think there's a lot more of a spotlight on these kind of behaviors.
Absolutely.
Versus when we were growing
in high
up.
School, yeah. I think, one of the things that was interesting about producing this case in particular to me is, like you said, warbaby, about it's a Goldilocks sized town, that can help or harm you in production. Because if people start to talk, which they do the minute, producers start coming, if someone's like, don't do the show, then that goes through the rumor mill and, people's Facebook messages are going off and, it can be really difficult. And, we did come up against that because shockingly, sometimes people don't want to talk about, traumatic
You would be surprised.
The heinous crimes their family members and friends commit.
You would be surprised how many times we get rejected versus how many people say yes.
I know. And in this case, this is how long ago it was. I had a landline at my office, and I forwarded my phone, or forwarded my office phone to my cell phone. And that night, I had some friends in from out of town, and I was so excited. I was like, oh, it's my big producing credit, woo. And we were at dinner and suddenly my phone rings and I was like, oh, okay, take the call. And it was Cassie's mom and she was agreeing to be on the show. She was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I haven't got back to you. I definitely want to be on the show. And it was such a big producer moment for me because I was like, oh, my forwarded office line and I'm producing, and it was very exciting. And I was
because it's a huge get for any show to get the mother of the victim, and so rarely not one, but so often we get rejected.
Yeah,
and it's such a vital part of the story.
And one of the things that I think keeps this story alive is Tori and his family are constantly going to the media for post-conviction relief, like I said, or starting a petition, or they are trying to go back to court on an appeal. And time after time after time, it puts Cassie's family in a position where they have to then take a public stance to then combat and confront that. So it's strange because this has been on, how many shows do you think, warbaby? There's Mine, there's Lost for Life, there's...
I should have looked before, but...
I want to say 5 or 6 shows. It's been on an ID show, an A&E show, it's been on a bunch of different... Anyway, a Reels show.
Covered. It's been covered a lot, especially because of the connection to the Scream movies.
Yeah.
So
not only is it covered extensively by people like Adriana and I, it's also covered extensively in the local media with, Tori constantly asking for, to come home. And Tori's story has not changed since 2006. And Tori believes himself to be a victim in this whole situation.
Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of, I feel like I have to be mindful about as a true crime producer. And something I always feel slightly conflicted about is that, bringing up the story again and again and again. And it's different when it's a podcast. We're talking about it. It's all public, it's
knowledge records.
Public knowledge, public record. But then, they must have people reaching out to them at least once a year.
Yeah.
And so I can understand sometimes it's like, it's hard to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've gone back to the family like so many different times, it's just I feel like as true crime producers, we worry about re-victimization.
Yeah.
And it's something we just have to keep,
And it's, and I think you bring up such a good point, especially in a case like this, where it's covered extensively in both, true crime docs and then also in the local media. And it, one thing that's interesting to me is Brian's family's response has been very quiet, calm, measured. I think they are deeply, deeply affected by what their son's done, but it is the polar opposite to, Tori and his family,
As is true for the boys' own reactions too. The way that Brian Draper talks about the crime he committed. I mean, I'm not going to say that there's definitely some type of psychological issue that he should be getting treated for, or should have been getting treated for, maybe in the juvenile system before he, moved up to the adult prison system. But he at least takes actual responsibility for the things, for all of their actions leading up to it. Whereas Tori doesn't at all want to even admit the full role that he played in it. He would rather portray himself as being led astray than take responsibility, than having the courage to say, yes, I did these terrible, terrible things. I thought about it and I did it. And sorry, Mom and Dad. See, that's what he can't do. That's what I feel like he can't do. Right. And if you take a look at any of his interviews and stuff, he sits there and he kind of lets his parents talk for him.
Well, and when you do that and you have someone saying, I was led astray, and then you're sitting there letting someone else talk for you, you are showing that behavior is still consistent. Even if, we don't believe it, even if we believe him to be just as culpable, it shows that he still has that. On a different case, maybe we'll have you back next time you're in town if you can.
It was great to. We're so glad you come and
thank you.
Journey to be on our show.
There is another case in California, and it's very similar. It's from the 90s, and all the guys have come up for parole recently, and one of them is very much kind of like Tori in this situation where the parole board was like, okay, so how many times are you led astray? Like, this is problematic if you want to be released. So we'll, table that for our next crossover episode.
Right. Yes.
But, we want to hear from you. And also, not only was I inspired to do this case because of, Murderous Minors and your stunning presence, warbaby, but I was also inspired because the Boise Murderinos started following us on Instagram, and I was like, hey, Boise, I got a case for you.
We got a case for all the states, let's be honest.
We got a case for all the states.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in again to the Pros and Cons. You can get in touch with us in several ways. You can email us at theprosandconspodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us at The Pros and Cons Show on Twitter and The Pros and Cons Podcast on both Instagram and Facebook. And please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts and your favorite Android app. Again, we want to thank Warbaby for coming on our show.
Thanks for having me, ladies.
And where can we catch your podcast?
Yeah, check out my show, Murderous Minors, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And find me on social media at Killer Kids Pod.
Woohoo! Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Ciao. Before we sign off, I just wanted to tell you about a new podcast I'm executive producing called The Intersection of Cancer and Life. It is hosted by my dear friend, Emily Garnett, who was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer in November 2017. Emily and her guests discuss the changes